Hello and welcome back to my channel. Let's continue the tutorial on how to build a URL shortener, a TinyURL clone with Quarkus version 2. Until now, we store the URL shorten items inside an array list. It would be perfect to store them inside a database. Let's discover how to do that inside this video. Let's start and follow my steps. We're gonna use PostgreSQL as database to store our URL shortener items and the Panache repository to manage the URL shortener entity. As first step, we have to open the POM.xml file to add all the Maven dependencies needed to achieve our goal. Add the first Maven dependency with the group ID io.quarkus and artifact ID Quarkus Hibernate ORM. Then add the second Maven dependency with group ID io.quarkus and artifact ID Quarkus JDBC Postgres. Perfect. Let's define our entity. Open the URL shortener class and on top of the class name add the annotation entity. On top of this field, let's add the annotation ID and the annotation generated value. In this way, we are configuring the framework to generate a new ID for us, for each entity. Don't forget to add the getter and setter methods for the new ID field. Our entity is ready, so let's now create the repository to manage our entity. Inside the package entity, create a new Java class called UrlShortener repository. This class must implement the Panache repository specifying our entity, meaning URL shortener. We also need to add the annotation application scope on top of the class name in order to inject the repository inside the service or resource class. That's it, very simple. We don't need to add any methods. We're gonna use just the methods provided by the Panache repository class. Let's now open the URL shortener service. Inside this class, we use the array list to store our items. We need to make some changes. First, we remove the array list, not needed anymore. Second, we inject the repository that we created. Third, let's use the repository inside the createURLShortener method, replacing the logic from searching the alias inside the list to searching the alias inside the database. We remove this part of the code and then write shortener repository.find. As the first argument, put alias because we want to find a specific alias and then the values of the alias, meaning URLShortener.getAlias. We want to know if there is already an item inside the database with that alias, so we can just use the method count provided by Panache repository. In the end, instead of storing the item inside the list, we can store the item inside the database using the method repository.persist. The createURL shortener returns the entire list of URL shorten items updated. We can maintain the same behavior writing repository.listAll. Let's now update the getURLShortener method. As we did it previously, instead of searching the alias inside the list, searching the alias inside the database. Delete this part of the code and replace it by writing return repository.findAlias and then specify the find first method provided by Panache repository. Perfect. Our service is updated. I forgot an important part. Inside the createURLShortener method, because we are using persist to store the item inside the database, we have to add the annotation transaction on top of the method like that. Finally, we have to define the right configuration property to connect to the database. Open the application properties file inside the resource folder and add the following properties. Quarkus data source db kind equal Postgres. Only for dev and test purpose, add the Quarkus Hibernate ORM database generation equal to drop and create. Instead, for prod mod, add Quarkus Hibernate ORM database generation equal update. Let's also add the properties Quarkus application name equal UrlShortener. Good. To run the project, we need to have PostgreSQL installed in our local machine. We can instead use Docker and search the PostgreSQL image, pull the Docker image, and run the container. Quarkus version 2 helps us to avoid all these steps by providing the dev service feature. You can find the specific dev service tutorial on my YouTube channel. Because we specify the property dbKind PostgreSQL, we can open the terminal and check just the Docker is up and running. After that, we can just run the project in development mode with Quarkus dev. As we can see in the console log, Quarkus takes care to pull and run the PostgreSQL Docker image for us. Now we can type R to check that all the tests are passing after our refactoring. Perfect. Let's finally try our project with all endpoints. Open Postman, add the URL http localhost 8080/API and select the post request. Click on the body tab and add a new JSON item. The JSON must contain the alias property. Let's put the value myAlias and the URL property with the value, for example, https google.com. We are creating a URL shortener for Google. Now click on send. Perfect. As we can see, we successfully created our first URL shortener. Now let's change the request from post to get, and inside the URL add /myalias. Click on send. Now we receive successfully a response. But what is this response? Let's check it with the browser. Open the browser and make the same GET request, localhost 8080/API/myalias. As we can see, our project redirects our request /myalias to google.com because we decided to create a new URL shortener for google.com using the alias myalias. Of course, if we can make a new request with a wrong alias, I mean an alias that doesn't exist in our database, our project does not make any redirection and return an empty response with the status code not found. Let's try it again with Postman. As we can see, our APIs are working well as we expected, and it would be better to document them in an easy and fast way. How? Let's discover it in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel to be always updated about new videos that I will upload, and see you in the next one. Bye.